due to popular demand and inspiration from some of my Facebook friends, I've decided to put a video up on YouTube. Now, this doesn't follow the regular rules that I've been following so far. Almost every one of my videos has been related to traveling and how I get around traveling around the world for free, for cheap. I get some of the top 5-star hotels for really cheap or free. I fly almost anywhere I want, any time I want for free. But I decided to put up a video about a different part of my life. And this is how I became raw. And what I mean by raw is that I have been eating nearly 100%, way high in the 90s, 95 to 97% of my calories come from raw fruits and vegetables since the about the year 2006. So I'm into my ninth year of eating this way, and my story is a little different from a lot of the other people who are doing this diet. I started off in my mid 20s, way back, and I found that when I went to the toilet to do the poop thing, I used to find that there was specks of blood on the toilet paper. And I thought I was a healthy person. I was living quite a normal lifestyle, what I thought was normal. I was working at a job from whatever 8 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon. It was a desk job. I've always been working with computers. It was a computer job where I sit behind a computer screen and typing things, figuring things out, writing codes and messages and all kinds of things like that. So I didn't really have much physical activity. My diet consisted of what most people eat. I would go to the cafeteria at the place I worked, and we would have whatever, mashed potatoes with turkey, or hamburger, or a cheeseburger, or the average things that most American, Canadian people would be eating. I would Once or twice a week we would go out to restaurants, and one of the people that I worked with, one of their favorite places was a hot dog place. And it's like I knew even back then that hot dogs were not the best choice. So I would order a burger instead of a hot dog, thinking that it doesn't have all this artificial ingredients and doesn't have weird parts of animals that we have no idea what's in there. Where that hamburger I thought was a little bit cleaner. It was supposed to be pure beef or whatever. I didn't know much about diet. I didn't know much about health, but I knew that hot dogs were not the best choice. So I was trying to reduce the amount I was eating. I was trying to stick with more simple things like baked potato with nothing on it, no salt, no butter, no French fries, minimize the amount of fried foods, and I knew that was important. So I was already ahead of the average person, but still I was eating mostly the standard diet. And then these occurrences would happen where I found there was blood on the toilet paper. And if it happened once, I just said forget about it. But when it happened consistently for a few days, I'd start getting concerned and worried about it. And a couple of times I asked my mom what she thought I should do, and she immediately told me that I needed to see a doctor. So she set up an appointment for me to see a doctor, and I went to see a doctor. And he told me he needed to do a test, and his test was a sigmoidoscope. It's really a it's like a tube with a camera at the end, uh, like a lens at the end that a little bit flexible, and you bend over this. It's like a bench thing that you bend over. It's like a bed bench thing, and you he puts this thing right up your butt, and he looks and tells he can tell what's sort of going on in there. So he did this test, and his his observations told him that there's nothing wrong. He said he came after the test was done, and I sat down with him, and he said, I didn't find anything wrong with you. And at that time, the bleeding wasn't actually happening anymore. And he told me, if the bleeding starts again, give me a call and we'll do the test again. Now, he didn't really tell me why I was getting these problems or anything. And I was a little confused. I said, well, isn't the reason why I'm going to a doctor is like to fix the problem? And he wasn't even interested in fixing the problem or even determining what the problem was. He seemed to be just interested in the symptoms. Like he said, if you see the symptoms again, come back. And he wants to find cancer, and he wants to do surgery, because I think he was a surgeon. And when it's cancer, like, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money, and I'm going to remove this guy's bowel, or remove the cancer, and I'm going to save his life. That's the kind of attitude I felt I was getting from this doctor. But nevertheless, I took his advice because I didn't know anything better to do. So time went on, several months went by, and then the bleeding came back again. And it wouldn't go away. It stayed for a little while. So I called the same doctor again, and we did repeat exactly the same procedure. I went to his office. He scheduled an appointment to do this test again, the exact same test. And by the time the test came around, the bleeding had stopped. He did the test again. The results were equal to the first time. He said, I don't see anything wrong with you. He said, if you start seeing the symptoms again, please call me back again and we'll do the test again. And I just didn't question it or anything. And I'm thinking back today, like, what am I, crazy? Why didn't I question him? What are we supposed to do? Just wait till I get some kind of incurable disease and die? Or he wait until it's like at the point where he has to remove parts of my body in order for me to survive? I mean, why do doctors do this? Why don't they say, okay, we know what's causing this problem. This is what's causing it, and stop doing the cause, and the symptoms will never come back. But no, he never ever said anything about that to me. He just said, we're going to do another test. And so anyways, this same doctor, I saw him later on, about a year or so later, and I'll tell you what happened then, but I'm going to go on with the story so we can move on, because this is going to be a bit of a long video. So anyways, this, I believe, was in 1986 or something around that time. And then in 1987, around late March, I was working at my job, and part of my job was traveling. The software that I was working on, there was a users group that would meet twice a year in different cities in the United States. And this particular one was going to be in Dallas, Texas. So I flew down to Dallas, and as soon as I got into Dallas, I think I sat down with some of the people I worked with when I got there in the bar of the hotel that we were staying at. And I don't remember if I ate anything or not. Might have had a beer, I don't remember. I wasn't much of a drinker, but I had an occasional beer. And I remember after getting into the room, I had to go to the toilet and I started seeing diarrhea. And there was some bleeding too. Because I already seen the bleeding, I really wasn't that concerned about it. But I was concerned about the diarrhea, so I had gone to the drugstore down the street from the hotel, and I bought some of the usual stuff that I would buy if I got diarrhea, kaopectate or Pepto Bismol or something. And I started taking those things. And after a few days, it didn't really seem to stop. Like the diarrhea continued on, but I still was convinced it was just traveler's diarrhea or just a change of diet or something that happened in going and traveling down to Texas. So I just sort of ignored it. I didn't really make a big deal out of it. And a few more days went by. I still had the diarrhea. It wasn't extremely bad, but it continued on for a few days. And then at the end of the week that I was supposed to be in Texas, in Dallas, my girlfriend was supposed to fly down to Texas, to Dallas with me, and we were flying together to Corpus Christi. So this was in late March, early April, and the weather was supposed to be pretty good in Corpus Christi at that time. Usually it was. So when we got there, the weather wasn't good. It was about 33 or 35 degrees Fahrenheit, which is quite cold. It's just above freezing, and it was sunny and cold. And we had gone there. We wanted to stay on the beach and have some fun, but it was absolutely not good for that. So we rented a car and we drove down to Matamoros, Mexico, and we went shopping there. We spent the day there. It wasn't much warmer there than it was in Corpus Christi, but it was a little bit warmer. And then we drove back to Corpus Christi, and when we got back to Corpus Christi, the weather was still the same. It was kind of miserable and cold, and my girlfriend, she really wanted to go where it was warm, and she wanted to spend some time on the beach and get the sun on her body, and even though I was still getting diarrhea through this whole time, I kind of said, okay, I feel like I want to do that too. I wanted to go get some warm weather. And the only place we could find that, we looked in the newspaper, the only place that was near us, anywhere near us, that had really nice warm weather was Acapulco, Mexico. So we decided that we're going to fly there. We flew to Acapulco, Mexico. And when you already have diarrhea and then you're heading to Mexico, well, that's not usually a good idea because everybody's heard of getting diarrhea in Mexico. Drinking the water is really an awful thing to do there. So I knew that I shouldn't drink the water, shouldn't drink anything with ice in it. And when I got there, I made sure to drink only from bottles. And I was drinking a lot of milk. I thought milk is going to coat the stomach or something or help me, which is just the opposite. Milk is probably the worst thing you can drink, period. But especially when you're having diarrhea, it's a horrible thing to drink. And which I had no clue at that time. I just thought maybe it's going to help me. It did not. It made things worse. So I did stay in Mexico for about a week, and then when I got back home, that was probably the worst night of my life. I had to go to the toilet, and I actually could not get up out of the toilet for 8 hours. I arrived home around 11 o'clock at night, and by 7 in the morning, I still was on the toilet. I could not get out. Every time I tried to get up, clean myself, and go to bed, it's like I had to go again. I had to sit down again and go again. And so I was concerned about that. I was really worried that there was something seriously wrong with me. So I went to a doctor that day, and the doctor was a gastroenterologist, and he told me he's seen cases like mine, like 3 or 4 every month. And I was saying, what are you talking about? What do you mean? He says, well, you have ulcerative colitis. And I see a lot of these cases like every month. And I was thinking, what's ulcerative colitis? That sounds weird. I think I heard of it because I think I used to see some commercials on TV about it, but I had no clue what it was. And he said, so I said, well, what is it? And how did I get it? And why did I get it? And he said, I don't know. It's idiopathic. I said, what's idiopathic? He says, oh, it means that we have no idea what causes it and why. I said, what do you mean you don't know what causes it? Why? He says, we don't know. We think there's some genetic part of it. So in other words, maybe you got it from someone in your family or whatever. And I was thinking about it, and I said, well, nobody in my family has it. Maybe some really distant relatives, second and third and fourth cousins that have it that I don't even know. But I don't know anybody in my immediate family. My grandparents didn't have it. My aunts and uncles didn't have it. My brothers didn't have it, and my parents didn't have it. So I don't know. What do I don't see the genetic part. and and then he said, I said, what about diet? Has anything to do with diet? He said, no, absolutely not. It's proven. Science has proven, he said, that his diet has absolutely nothing to do with your condition, with ulcerative colitis. He said nothing to do with it. You can eat any diet you like, and it's not going to change anything. I was thinking, okay, whatever. And then he said the only thing we can do is give you steroids. Steroids are going to possibly help you, and the only problem with steroids, there's some side effects. And I was thinking, okay, so what's the side effects? And he says, well, they range from just like get a bloated moon face is one thing, and he says, or you can get pimples, or you can feel euphoric. He says, or you can feel depressed, or he said you can actually die from it. That's the worst case. He says also you can go crazy. It could affect your mood. It could affect your brain. It could affect your hip. He said it can actually cause necrosis of the hip, which is means your hip dies and you have to get a hip replacement, and a whole bunch of other things. He said these are all the possible side effects, and he says most of these don't usually happen to you, but he says sometimes they could, because that's I have to tell you about that before you take it. So I decided that before I take it, I wanted a second opinion, and he said sure. In fact, he suggested that I do go for a second opinion. So I went to another doctor, and since the other doctor, and he too, and the other doctor also, when they heard that I was in Mexico, and people who go to Mexico often get bugs or something in their stomach, so they all wanted to do stool tests to see if there was possibly some type of bug that I was fighting that was causing all this diarrhea and bleeding and everything. And they did the tests, and some of these tests take week or two, or sometimes even longer, because they have to grow the culture in the lab or whatever before they can determine whether it's positive or not. So I did all these tests, and meanwhile the time was going by. I wasn't taking any medicine, wasn't taking the prednisone, the steroids, and I was taking something else called Azicol, which is supposed to be like a anti-inflammation, sort of like aspirin for your colon. It sort of did a little bit of help, but it didn't really stop the problem. And I asked the doctor what was the good diet that he suggested that I have. He said diet has nothing to do with it, but he did suggest that I don't eat raw fruits and vegetables. And he suggested that I eat a lot of starchy foods like potatoes and rice, not beans, but stuff that's more starchy, maybe some breads and some things that are not irritating to the bowel. So that was his suggestion. I more or less followed what he suggested. He also suggested I eat meat, and chicken, and mostly boiled things like meat and chicken that were boiled. No spices, very little spice, very little salt. And so I basically followed that diet that he suggested for a while. And during that time, I was waiting for the results of the other stool tests, and my condition kept getting worse and worse. And I had seen two or three doctors. They all wanted the same stool test. They all told me, don't take the steroids unless we do the stool test and find out that they're negative. And after a while, all these tests came back negative, and they didn't find anything. And I was just getting worse and worse and worse. And by this time, it was about 3 or 4 weeks, and I lost a lot of weight, and I was just really, really weak, and I was having a hard time just doing my regular routine, like going to work and coming home and having. I think I was even doing studying at night. I was doing my MBA classes at night, and it was a lot for me. And I was having a real, real hard time. And then finally, one Sunday morning, it got so bad. I lost tons of weight. I was really, really down. I was really weak. My body was just. I think I had a fever that morning, in fact, and I just couldn't get up out of bed. I was just too weak to wake up and get up and do anything. And by like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my mom came in my room and she said, "What happened? Why didn't you get up today?" I said, "I don't feel well. I just don't feel like getting up today." And she realized I looked really pale and I was thin and I was weak. And she said, "Oh, we're going to the hospital." And I didn't know any difference. So I just said, "Sure, let's go to the hospital. Let's see what they say." And so I went to the emergency room, and they did all the usual tests. They did the blood tests, and I think they did more stool tests, which I really didn't need because I had so many. They did the blood pressure and pulse and temperature and all that stuff. And they put an intravenous in me, and they put me on one of these beds. And for that night, they didn't really have a place for me in the hospital because it was full. So they let me just sleep in. There's an observation room at the emergency room, and I just slept in the observation room. And then sometime around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, some orderlies came and they woke me up, and they said, "We're taking you upstairs to a room." So apparently some guy had died upstairs, and that left a place open for me, and they wheeled me up to the room in the middle of the night. And then immediately when I was in the room, they didn't even tell me or ask for my permission, and they put the steroids, or the prednisone, into the intravenous. They mixed it together without even telling me. And that, to my surprise, the next morning I woke up and I had to go to the bathroom, and my stool was actually solid. And this is the first time in 2 or 2.5 months that I had seen a solid stool. And all it did was put the steroids into the intravenous overnight. So I thought immediately, wow, this is unbelievable. The drug is helping overnight, just immediately. And I know that they warned me about all these side effects, but I didn't think they were going to happen to me. The side effects can't happen to me. The good effects were happening, but I was thinking, no, the bad effects can't happen to me. So the way these steroids work is you have to taper down because they are actually replacing hormones that your body makes. So when you start taking too much of them, your body stops making this hormone. So if you stop taking the steroids, then your body won't know it's time to start making the hormone again, and you can die from that. So they never let you stop taking them immediately. You have to taper down. So you reduce the dose until you get down to zero, and then your body starts making the steroid or the hormone again. So what happened is I it seemed to help me, and then I tried to taper down on the prednisone, and every time I tapered down on the steroids or prednisone is the same thing, I would get the symptoms again. So over several weeks, I would taper off the steroids. As soon as I got down to a low dosage, I got sick again, and it happened several times. After you taper down to low dose and I got sick again, the doctor would just put me way back up on a high dose, and that would work, and I would feel better. But then I taper down again, trying to get off of them because you can't stay on them for long term. It's really dangerous. And it would happen again. I get the symptoms again, and this happened over 3 or 4 times. And so I went to see other doctors and see what their opinion was. Should I do something different? Should I continue doing this or what? And another doctor he recommended that I use some enemas or something made out of like Asacol. Asacol is like an aspirin anti-inflammatory, and I tried those. And at the same time, I tapered off or trying to taper off the steroids. And that particular time, it actually worked. I was able to get off the steroids completely using those Asacol enemas. So I was really excited. This is it. Asacol enemas and prednisone, and then taper off the prednisone, and then I feel better, and the diarrhea stops, and the bleeding stops, and everything's great. Well, up until here, I was still eating more or less the same diet. I was trying to stay away from the raw foods, eating boiled chicken and boiled beef and baked potatoes and boiled potatoes and steamed vegetables and things like that. And that was seemed to be working for me. It seemed to be keeping me all right. Uh, but then I started getting depressed every time I would be back high dosage of the steroids. I'd be very, very depressed. And I knew that was one of the symptoms, one of the side effects of the steroids. So I wasn't sure though if that was it with the cause or I was just depressed. And I got to the point where I was even calling the suicide line because I felt like jumping off of buildings. But then when I realized it was just the steroids and all I had to do is taper off of them, my depression, well, I still was depressed, but I realized that the only reason I was depressed was because of the steroids. So I said, well, don't kill myself, because just get off of these steroids. So that was becoming a problem. Every time I got the colitis symptoms, I'd go on the steroids. The steroids would get me depressed, and then I'd have to go off of them, and it became a like a cycle like that. Steroids, depression, and then some symptoms again, and it went up and down like that for years and years and years. I went to different doctors. I moved to different cities, found new doctors, and I must have seen at least 15 different gastroenterologists in 2 different countries, in about 3 or 4 different cities, and every single one was singing the same tune. I talked to everyone, and everyone says it has nothing to do with diet. Your colitis has absolutely nothing to do with diet, and you have to take steroids, and the only way we can cure you for good is we can remove your colon, and that leaves you with no colon. And there's a couple of ways they can fix you up. They can either put a bag, what do you call it, a stomy or something, a colostomy bag, and you can empty your bowel through the bag. Or they have new procedures now where they actually you don't lose your continence or whatever. They connect the small bowel to your rectum, and they call it a J pouch. But then they leave some cells there, and they're afraid that if you leave cells there, you're going to get cancer. So you have to check that for cancer all the time. And none of these alternatives sounded like something I wanted to hear about, because they weren't working on resolving the problem. Not up until then, no one no doctor out of all these doctors had told me what the problem is. They all said it's idiopathic. We don't know what causes it, and that just wasn't. Like they were hiding something. I didn't know what, and so uh, I went on. I went on so after all these doctors, they all had the same story, and finally, after about 15 years, I went up and down different doctors on steroids, off of them. It was like a roller coaster. I had read some books, I had read some things online about different diets. I read this book about the specific carbohydrate diet where you're supposed to stay away from any kind of processed foods. You can't eat breads and sugar and things like that. You can eat fruits and vegetables. They actually encourage eating lots of meat. I was actually trying to stay away from meat. I read some articles that said most vegetarians, most children who are born vegetarian, they just never get colitis. Just like they say the Amish kids, they never get all these diseases that American or regular white kids or black kids get. And so it's similar to that. I figured that if you're vegetarian, you're more less susceptible to getting colitis. So I was becoming more and more vegetarian, more vegan, and I knew I was lactose intolerant too. So I was already stopped using dairy products. So that was off of my diet already, and I was cutting down in red meat from a long time, and I decided that I was going to just cut out the chicken and fish, which is probably the only meat I was eating at that time, and I would be basically vegan, and that I thought may have helped with my condition, even though the doctors said that, oh no, diet has nothing to do with it. I was reading things that were telling me that wasn't true. So I had been already on a bit of a vegan diet, except the occasional time. I wouldn't care so much if there were eggs in my food, but I never really was much of an egg eater. I didn't really care for eggs. So overall, I was eating a vegan, like a cooked vegan diet with whatever I desired. So it was vegan but cooked, and a lot of stuff was junk food. I would eat fries or fried this and fried that, but feeling a little bit better. Still had to go on the steroids occasionally. Still had some symptoms occasionally, and then it was 2001, and I had just changed to a new job. And this job, uh, it was I do software testing for QA, and the software that this company had was it did billing for cell phones. So they had these big tapes that came from the switch, and the tape had to be read into the computer. And I had a really slow computer, and it would take sometimes as much as 6 or 8 hours for this tape to be read in. And then only after the tape was finished being read in, the software was able to do the billing part. And that's the part that I needed to have done before I can do my day-to-day tasks. My work was comparing to make sure that the current software version works the same way as the old one, or whatever changes were made are in the new software. So I had some time, and most of the time I would spend doing things I needed to do for the job. But then sometimes I just ran out of things to do for the job, and I was left with some time, and I would start doing things like searching for things, people that heal themselves from ulcerative colitis. Because according to the doctors, there's no cure, there's no way to heal yourself except if you remove your colon. So I thought, okay, somebody in the world must have had colitis that maybe they were successful doing something that's maybe alternative or different. And in my search, immediately, the first line that came up was this Crohn's Colitis.com or something like that. it was run by a guy named David Klein, and on his website he explained that he used to have ulcerative colitis and he healed himself, and you can find out how I did it if you give me a call and so on. And so I called him. I didn't think I had anything to lose. I gave him a call, and he actually answered the phone right off. The first time I called him, I guess it was fate. And he says to me, I asked him about the website. I said, I read your website, and I said I have ulcerative colitis too, and had it for quite a long time, and I'm trying to get rid of it. I would love to get rid of it, and I read that you did, and he says, yeah, I did, and he said, well, if you want to know how I did it and what happened, you want to buy my book. And as soon as I hear someone saying buy and selling and giving, like I'm used to people who are really helpful. They want to be helpful. They're not looking for money. Money comes to those who do the right thing eventually. And when he said, "Oh, you have to buy my book," I was thinking, he's just probably trying to scam me out of some money. But then I asked him, "Well, how much is that book, by the way?" And he said, "Well, it's $14.95, and $14.95." I'm thinking, well, I guess I can afford that, even if it's not very helpful. I don't mind losing $14.95. So I asked him to send it, and he sent me the book. And it turned out it was like his first version of the book. It was just a bunch of papers, 8.5 by 11 papers, photocopied and stapled together. I think I still actually have that book. And I read the book. I read every page of it, and it just made so much sense to me. It just resonated with me. He said that humans evolved over so many years eating fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and raw stuff in the jungles, and our bodies were not, they didn't evolve to eat the diet that we're eating now. We're not supposed to be cooking food. We're not supposed to be eating animal products. Human beings don't have the facilities to chase down, capture, and eat living animals. We just don't. We have to use guns and weapons to do that, or we have to have someone else do it for us, or it doesn't make sense. Like every species of animal on the planet has everything it needs to get its food. And it's like a cat, when it sees a mouse, it salivates and it's thinking, oh my God, that's going to be a juicy meal in a few minutes when I catch it. But when we see a cow, we don't salivate. I don't salivate when I see a cow. I just want to go over. If it's a calm, peaceful cow and it looks like it's friendly, I might want to just pat it on its head and feed it or something. I don't really get the urge to stick a knife in his head and cut his neck open and eat its body. It just doesn't appeal to me. And it's true. I don't know how other people. I know this is gonna bother people who eat meat, but do you ever go out and kill your own animals and just eat it on the spot? You probably don't. So why do it? Why do you eat meat? I mean, a cat will do that. A cat will find a mouse and it'll kill it with its own two claws, and it'll eat the mouse from head to toe. I've actually watched cats do this, but I've never seen a person take down a cow or a pig or a sheep with his own two hands without some kind of a tool, or have someone else do it for him who's paid to do it, and and just to tear the body apart with his hands and eat it without cooking. I mean, the whole system is so artificial that people can't do this. They have to go line up in their car, completely separate from the killing and the animals being born, and showing that it's even an animal. That you'll see there's like a picture of a cow, of a cartoon of a cow or a cartoon of a pig at these restaurants. But you're never going to see pictures of the cows hanging upside down with their blood coming out of them, because that's really what it is. It's not a picture of a cow in a cartoon. It's a real cow, a completely sentient cow that didn't do anything wrong. It was just forced to be born so that we can kill it, and then made into this product that people will line up for because they added the right spices and salt and stuff to make it juicy, and it's all marketing and all this fancy stuff to make people want it, and it's very addictive, but it's definitely not the right choice. It's causing many diseases and problems, and I can't prove what it has or hasn't caused. I could just talk about what helped me from getting rid of my colitis, and that's what this video is all about. So, anyways, so this is now after reading his his story, this David Klein story. I found out that it made no sense what we were eating. Like even some of the rice and the pastas and breads and cereals and these things, they don't really make any sense to eat when our body was designed for fruits and vegetables and in their raw state, in the ripe state. So uh, I was already eating somewhat of a vegan diet at the time, like I mentioned before, but I was eating cereal with something like almond milk for breakfast, and then it's like pasta or pasta with tomato sauce for dinner, and maybe some other kind of pasta or noodles or corn, something vegan, vegetarian tortillas or whatever for lunch. And that was basically my diet. And when I read this book from Dr. Klein, actually, he encouraged me, inspired me to stop eating the same way. So I started eating fruits, just fruits, and mostly organic fruits, whatever organic fruits I could find. I had no idea how many calories or what combinations or whatever. I just knew fruits. So I would eat like two or three apples and an orange, a couple of avocados. I would have maybe a grapefruit. I would have a papaya, a mango, and then some grapes or something. And then when I felt like I was full, I had a whole bunch of fruit, and I'd say, okay, I'm satisfied now. And that's all I knew. I just said, I'll just have fruit for breakfast. So I got rid of all my cereals and all the almond milks, and went from that day on. I was eating fruit for breakfast, and I was eating the same stuff for lunch and for dinner. It was like pastas and whatever, and that went on for quite a few years. And I didn't take any medicines or anything that time. And finally, about 4 years later, around 2005, which is 10 years ago, I found that I started bleeding again. And I didn't know why. I didn't know what caused it. I didn't know if it was something I was eating or. And by this time, I more or less was forgot about David Klein, and I was still occasionally seeing doctors. I was going for these colonoscopies because doctors will tell you if you've had colitis over a certain number of years, your chance of getting colon cancer is 5 times the average, and they've encouraged everybody to get uh, colonoscopies, and I was doing it because, of course, what else did I know? I didn't know any better. So I called the doctor at this time, and this is because I was bleeding and I was having some diarrhea and symptoms like that. And I asked him what I should do, and he said, "Well, what is normally works for you?" And I said, "Well, these Asacol enemas, they used to always work for me." And so he ordered some so I can pick them up at the pharmacy, and I picked them up at the pharmacy, and I actually took a bigger dosage than I normally did because this was something that was going on for a few months, and I wanted to get rid of it, and it just didn't work. I did it for like a week, 2 weeks, no change, nothing happened to make it any better, and so I was wondering why isn't it working? There's something wrong here. So that's when I thought about this guy, David Klein, again. And I said, that guy seemed to know what he's doing, and maybe I'll give him a call. And because here it was about 6 or 7 months, and I was having symptoms, and I wasn't getting any better. And my diet, I thought, was the best diet. I was eating fruit in the morning, and I was eating vegan food the rest of the day. So I got in touch with this guy, David, and I told him what happened, and he said, I could help you. I could, for sure, I could help you. The only thing I ask of you is that you have to stay home from work or school or whatever you do. You got to stay home and rest. And he said that, and I'll explain what you have to eat and do, and you just have to give me a call, and I'll help you out. And of course, he charges for that. I think I paid him like $100 for that call, and so I said, okay, let's do it. And I went into work and I told my boss that I'm going to be taking off at least a week or two to heal myself. And she saw that I was getting very weak and getting very thin. And she said, yeah, please don't worry about it. Take your time and come back when you're ready. Come back when you're healthy. And so I stayed home and listened to his advice. His advice was to just eat very sweet and ripe fruits like bananas or grapes or papayas. And as much as I want of those, I could eat them. What I could eat them like raw, or I could eat them in a smoothie, make smoothies out of them, or I could like even bananas. I could eat them frozen. But just eat that, like just eat the things he said. And he said I should also make some celery juice. I had a juicer, and he recommended I eat just celery juice and not eat the celery because it might be a too much roughage or something on my sensitive colon at that time. And so I did exactly what he said. I had some celery juice. I had eaten a lot of bananas. I made some smoothies out of bananas, and I bought tons and tons of bananas. I made sure I ate as much as I could. Whenever I was hungry, I just ate more and more bananas. And after about 3 days, and I stayed in bed as much as I could. After about 3 days, my bowel movements, of course, I was watching them very closely, and I was getting a lot of diarrhea. But after 3 days, I noticed that the bleeding had stopped. Like there was bleeding in my stool every single time. But after 3 days, the bleeding stopped. And all the medicines I tried, they couldn't stop it. But bananas stopped it. And I thought this guy, Klein, was a real genius. And I didn't realize it wasn't him. It was basically me. It was my body that was the genius. My body wants to be healed, and it's going to try to heal itself. And I kept stopping it from healing by eating these horrible, difficult to digest foods, and I wasn't relaxing, and I wasn't resting, and I wasn't giving myself and my body the opportunity to heal. So here it was, 3 days, and my body has already started to heal. The only problem is the diarrhea continued. Like the bleeding was over, it was stopped, but the diarrhea continued on for another few days. And I was getting concerned because I already had lost about 25% of my body weight. I lost a lot of weight. I was really, really skinny, and I was getting concerned already at that point. So I called this Dr. Klein again, and I asked him what's going on. I said, you did a good job, or you helped me a lot with the bleeding, but now I really would like to see this diarrhea stop, and I'm getting concerned because I'm really losing a lot of weight. And I said, I eat as much as I want, but still it all just comes out. And he suggested that I make some steamed vegetables, just a little bit of steamed, like minor steaming, uh, potatoes or some, what do you call it, some zucchini or any kind of other squashes he suggested, or even celery, carrots, uh, other kinds like of root vegetables, even beets. And so I bought a few of those different things. I bought some potatoes and carrots and celery, and I steamed them, and I had just one or two meals of that, and uh, lo and behold, the very next day, the diarrhea stopped, and I saw stools, like solid stools, the most impressive stools I've practically ever seen in my life, and it was just unbelievable what my body did just by stepping away and letting it do its thing. And I suppose the reason why he had me eat the steamed veggies is because I had gone too far. Like I probably would have seen the diarrhea eventually slow down and stop after all the toxins and everything, all the drugs I was using had gone out of my body, had been cleared from the body. But I was so concerned that I actually stopped it early, stopped the healing early by using the steamed vegetables. So now I knew that everything I heard from the doctors up until this point was either lying, or they just were hiding something, or they really just didn't know. And some combination of those three. They just, they just apathy. They just don't want to know. They either do know and they just lie about it. But every single doctor, like 15 in my life, told me the same story, that diet has nothing to do with your colitis, with your condition. And then after 1 week of eating a different diet, I had like 15 years of colitis was healed in 1 week just from eating a different diet. And it's like I completely lost confidence in the medical establishment, because there's no book, there's no, except for the one David Klein wrote, but other than that, there's nobody else at that time. Maybe there's a few today, but there's practically nobody out there that has a book or anything that explains what is the problem. Why is colitis happening? Crohn's or colitis, and I imagine all these other problems that people have with their digestive system, the IBS, and all these zillions of different problems that people have, is all caused by their diet, which is obvious because when you eat food, the first place it goes is into your digestive system. It starts in your mouth and it moves all the way through it. And how could it not be an effect of your symptoms? Of course it is. And don't listen to what doctors tell you. They're just told to say that because they want to keep their fancy $150,000 yacht, and they want to keep their $25 million homes on the sea, and they love making their $1 million a year or whatever, which is great. The reason why they make these crazy amounts of money is because the pharmaceutical companies are making billions and billions, and they say, you keep being our drug pusher for us, and we'll keep you happy. Meanwhile, the police want to arrest all the quote unquote small time and even bigger time drug pushers that are pushing marijuana, which is much more natural than anything that these pharmaceutical companies are making. Like, I don't endorse marijuana. I personally will never touch this stuff, and I don't think anybody should. But it's much better for you than anything that the pharmaceutical companies make. But yet, people who sell marijuana in certain states, of course, some states it's legal now, but if it's in a state where it's illegal, even just a couple of joints, you sell it to somebody, you will go to jail. But if you're a doctor and you have a license to prescribe this crap, you not only don't go to jail, you get millions of dollars to keep pushing this crap on people who are completely unsuspected, and they trust you. Like, if you see a guy selling drugs in the street, you wonder, is he really selling marijuana, or is it something else, or is there shoe polish in there, or is it something that's poison? But when it's a doctor, you think, oh my God, he's got to be doing something good for me. But no, he isn't. He's not doing something good for you. He's doing something good for himself, not for you. He's doing something good for him and his boss. His boss is the pharmaceutical company industry. So never take doctors' advice. I have now learned that whatever they say, you practically have to do the opposite. So at that point, I knew 100% that everything that's caused, everybody who has symptoms that are digestive system related, it's their own cause. They caused it by themselves from the crap that they eat. Crap that they eat, people who smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, use drugs, whether they're pharmaceutical or recreational, all drugs are bad. They're not, if it's not food, it doesn't belong in your body. And none of the things I just listed, cigarette smoke, tobacco, and uh, alcohol, and cooked food, fried foods, animal products, dairy products, meat products, eggs, refined products like breads, cereals, rice, and beans, all those grains of any kind, they don't belong in our body. Our bodies were built for fruits and vegetables. We digest them readily. We absorb nutrients from them. Fruits and vegetables in the right combinations have every possible nutrient we ever need. I could say that a million times over. I know thousands, not hundreds, thousands of people who are following a fruit and vegetable diet for years and years and years and years and years, and their blood test results are better than anybody's who's eating a different diet. Anybody's. And I will put that to the test. Anybody who doubts what I say, I can show you these people. I can show you their blood tests. I can show you what they're doing. You, I will challenge anybody who's eating a standard diet to compare their health to these people. And there's going to be no comparison. So, anyways, I then knew that I had to do something about my diet. And unfortunately, this Dr. Klein did not prescribe a diet. And I think because he is eating whatever he likes, I'm not sure what he eats. I think he eats just fruits and vegetables, but I'm not sure in what combination and how. And so that's probably why he's not so confident. He knows what to eat and when to eat it and so on. And so he doesn't prescribe a diet in his books. And so I didn't really know what I should be eating. I just knew it had to be fruits and vegetables. And I just decided at that point that I'm going to find the diet, some diet that I'm going to follow for the rest of my life that's going to keep me from being sick again with colitis. Because now I knew there's a diet out there that will prevent me from ever being sick again. Because sick is the symptoms only come from eating the wrong things. You eat the right things, you don't get sick. And I went on and then I did some research and I found out about raw food diets. And I found out some people had eaten raw foods and they had colitis and they were helping themselves by eating raw foods, raw vegan foods. And so for a while, I did some research on that, and I found out that, as they used to say, as long as it's raw, it's healthy and it's good for you. And so I tried that diet for a while, which consisted of a lot of fatty foods. I was eating a lot of nut butters, a lot of what they call like bread, dried nuts and seeds, breads like made from flax seeds and all kinds of things like that, sesame seeds made from sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds. And I would eat these breads and I'd be smothering them with nut butters. They're basically all fat with fat. And I thought this I'm doing great because it's all raw food. And then I would have avocados and I would have fruit mixed with that, and I didn't know what was combining with what, and whether I was doing enough calories or too many calories from fat, too little calories. I was eating salads in the evening with a lot of olive oil on it, and I just so I was going on eating that for a few months, and I still wasn't getting symptoms, but I wasn't feeling great. I didn't have the energy level I wanted to have. I was still feeling a bit tired, and I realized that it maybe something's lacking or something's not completely right. I don't think you just eat anything raw because if it's just raw, you can just drink oil all day and you're getting enough calories, but is that the best thing to do? It's like anything as long as it's raw doesn't seem to make any sense.